All right, I think we're live. Hi, JP. Thanks for joining me today. I appreciate it. For those of you watching, this is Slicing Pie in Canada. We're going to go through a brief overview of how Slicing Pie works with JP on the line. He's going to answer questions about how Slicing Pie works in Canada, and it's much easier than you might think. There are lots of people who use Slicing Pie up in Canada. I do regular calls with people, and I think JP has got a number of clients who use Slicing Pie. What I like to make sure people know is it's a universal framework, so it should work exactly the same no matter where you are on the planet. So if it works in America, it should work in Canada. I got someone translating the book into Persian right now for Iraq and Iran, so it should work anywhere. So what I'm going to do is go through my PowerPoint deck here that explains Slicing Pie, and please feel free to chat questions in if you have questions for me or JP. So this works. Start getting. So this is perfect equity splits for early stage bootstrap companies. So Slicing Pie is used during the bootstrap phase of the company, when your company has just started out, from the time you have the idea to the time you actually turn it into reality. That's a time in a startup's life where they can get away with not paying for stuff. So most companies are expected to pay their bills. They're expected to pay their rent, their supplies, they're expected to pay for everything. They're expected to pay for their employees. But startups, for some reason, can get away with not paying because they don't have any cash. And it's during this bootstrapping time where the allocation of equity is especially important, because it's very fluid and we're dividing up zero. So we have to have a model for dividing up zero. Now, the first deal people do when they start a company is they determine how they're going to split equity up. This is the first major deal. We get together, we have an idea, and we shake hands on this major deal, which is the equity split. And how your equity split is made will determine the way you experience success later on. It won't guarantee your success, but how you experience success is directly related to your equity split. I was in a deal about 10 years ago that I just exited this year that was horrible because I did a bad equity split. So even though the company was successful and we were a great success and the company had a nice exit, the way I experienced the success was very painful. And it's directly related to how I split the equity in the company. So this model is designed to protect you from that and make sure you get exactly what you deserve, no more, no less. So the first thing people do when they do their split is they think about how we're going to do the math. And we don't know the top and the bottom of this equation. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know how much the company is worth, so we make up a number. We don't know what you're going to do, so we make up a number. We're basically just making up numbers. And the numbers we make up are these numbers. We take what you promise you're going to do, what someone promises they're going to do. I promise I'm going to come in and be your VP of marketing and do a great job and work 90 hours a week for 10 years. And they will also work on the founder's dreams. The dream is we're going to be worth $1 billion in year 3. I saw a company recently thought they're going to be worth $1 trillion in year 3. I mean, there's just huge dreams. So we divide our dreams by our promises, and that gives us a percentage. So if the company's worth $1 billion and you can put $1 million of effort in there, then 1% of the company should be plenty. That's literally how our math goes. But unfortunately, we can't predict the future. And because we can't predict the future, we have to find a better way to do this. And the first place we go to are lawyers and advisors and professors and girlfriends and boyfriends and our rich, wealthy relatives and people who are well-experienced, well-meaning, well-intentioned, and they don't know how to do it either. So they say, go predict what you're going to be making in the future. What's the startup going to make? How much time are you going to put in? What are you going to do? They ask future thinking questions, and you should ask future thinking questions. You should go approach it that way, but it can't be the basis for your equity split. The unknowable future can't be the basis for your equity split. We'll look at industry standards, like what does a CTO in Ontario get for a startup? They're just rules of thumb. There's no way we can know the future, so we're just basically guessing. And we use what's called a fixed equity split. A fixed equity split is when chunks of equity expressed as percentages are doled out in the beginning of the company before any actual work is done. So the most ambiguity, the most unknowns are out there, we split equity with our partners. We do 60-40 because it's like your idea, JP, and you're super smart and I'm not as important, so it'll be 40% for me. 51-49 with the illusion of control. I want to maintain control of my business, so I'll keep 51% of the equity. So we're assuming that the whole company's going to go exactly where we thought it was going to go, and that these splits are going to be the same splits in the end. Usually people say, screw it, we'll just keep it simple, we'll go 50-50 because we can't figure it out. We'll go a third, a third, a third. Most startups do equal splits, so they divide up the number of people they have by 100% by the number of people they have, and that's their equity split. And the problem is that what happens if you do all the work? So we're 50-50 and you do all the work. I own half your company, which is very common. Or let's say we're 50-50 and I'm a marketing person and you're a technology person. You want to bring in a technology person. It's going to help you, not me. So should it come out of your share or my share? Well, what if you want to quit? You get to keep your equity. Do I have to buy you out? There's a million things that can happen. Things change all the time. I was once with a company where the CTO actually got hit by a bus and died of his wounds, and his wife inherited his half of the company. Now, she was a doctor. She had no skills in CTOing at all, but she still had half the company, and that company went out of business because she didn't want to give up her half, and I don't blame her. That was all she had. Besides being a doctor, I guess. But these things destroy companies faster than they can make companies. So the only thing that never changes in a startup is the fact they're always changing. So you have to have a model that accommodates the change. So that when things change, one of these things will be true. The first one is that your share will be greater than the value of your contribution divided by the total value. I mean, you have this gator represents how much you'll have more than your fair share. Or the flip side of the coin is the value of your contribution divided by the total value is less than your fair share. So sometimes people get less than their fair share. Nobody wants less than their fair share. Some people want more than their fair share, but what you really want is exactly your fair share. So when you go into these negotiations, you know that you are going to be getting more than your fair share or less than your fair share because you can't predict the future. So I call these alligator pit negotiations, which is two people getting into the room and fighting over equities, but knowing that the outcome is going to be painful for one of them. It's an unknowable event. So we got to have a tool that helps us solve for this problem. Because if it's not fair, it's not going to be fun. I call this the fix and fight model. You fix the equity split using a static split. You fight about it when you realize it's wrong, which you hire a lawyer, and the lawyer helps you unwind it, and you get another fixed split. So you have to go back to the table and you fight about it again. It's this endless cycle of fighting and readjusting. And it always takes the fun out of startup companies, which is why we started companies in the first place, because they're more fun. So what we need is a model that's perfectly fair, that rewards actual contributions to the company instead of promises. We want to provide ongoing motivation to the team to continue to contribute, because once I have my 50%, I no longer have motivation to continue necessarily. I want to accommodate team changes because people are going to come and go. I want to be flexible in the face of rapid change. I don't want to have to renegotiate every time someone joins the company. And I get rid of the gators. I don't want anyone to think I'm going to take advantage of them or that I'm going to take advantage of myself. Because if it's fair, it'll be fun. And it works like this. JP, you and I play blackjack?
Yes, of course.
All right, you and I are going to play blackjack together. And we're going to split the winnings 50-50. We're playing as a team, not as opponents, but as a team, right?
All right.
And we shake on it, and we don't notarize it. It's all legal. So we go to the tables, and I bet a chip, and you bet a chip. We don't know if we're going to win, do we?
Not at this stage. No, nothing seen.
We don't know how much we're going to win. We don't know how long it's going to take to win. The future is unknowable. We can't know the future. What we do know for sure is that you bet a chip and I bet a chip, right?
At this stage, yes.
So the dealer deals an ace and another ace. We got two aces. What do?
Oh, we bet?
Split them, right?
That's right.
Split the aces and double down our bets.
Yeah.
I'm out of money and you're not, so you put two more chips down. So now you've bet 3 chips and I've only bet 1 chip. We still don't know if we're going to win. We don't know how much we're going to win. We don't know how long it's going to take to win. All we know for sure is that you bet 3 and I bet 1. If we win, does 50-50 sound like a fair split?
Well, no, I've not at this point risked more, right? So I think the dynamic has changed a little bit.
Right. What we know for sure is that you bet 3 times as much as I did. So the only obvious answer is you should get 75% and I should get 25%.
Yeah.
That's obvious. That's logical. That's unambiguous. The value of our share of the equity should be based on our share of the bets. Just like in blackjack. In startups, it's exactly the same thing. But instead of betting on cards, we're betting on ideas. And we bet time and facilities and supplies. We keep betting and keep betting and keep betting. The betting just continues. We keep putting chips on the table. The payout is profits, or the payout is the company selling out. That's the big win. But we don't know how much that payout is going to be. We can try to predict it. We can hope we're going to win. We can't tell we're going to win. So we keep placing bets. As long as we're not getting paid, we're placing bets. The amount that we're betting is always equal to the fair market value of our contribution. So what's your hourly rate, JP?
$3.50 an hour.
So if I don't pay you $3.50 an hour, you're betting $3.50 an hour.
That's right.
You're not betting more than that, and you're not betting less than that. You're just betting when you're not getting paid. If I give you an office space for $1,000 a month that I could rent for $1,000 a month and you don't pay me, then I'm betting $1,000 a month. I'm always betting the fair market value. And fair market value is easy to understand because companies pay fair market value all the time. That's what we pay. We look at the prices, we look at the market, we decide what to pay. So we make good financial decisions. Everything in a company, everything can be bought and sold on the fair market. If there's no market for it, it's probably not worth anything. If there's a market for it, we can determine a fair market value. So when you don't get paid, if the startup does not pay you during the bootstrap stage, you're simply betting the fair market value. And so a person's share of the equity should be based on that person's share of the bets, because that's the only thing we actually know. So what Slicing Pie does, it looks at the bets on the table, keeps track of who made what bet, and then divides the shares appropriately. That's the basic model. All you got to think about is who's placing bets, how, and keeping track of the bets. If I paid you for your time, you wouldn't deserve any equity because I'm paying you, right?
Yeah, exactly. So if you're being paid straight up, and then you can obviously choose, a company can choose to pay someone if it wishes. This is reflecting that we're being paid actually in equity for participating.
Yeah, this says you made if you make a bet, you deserve part of the winnings.
That's
and
right.
The equity at this point represents part of the winnings. If I just pay your bills, as many of your clients do, right?
That's right.
Then I don't need to give you equity, and you don't expect it or deserve it, which is fine.
That's right.
You're made whole.
Yeah.
If I pay you less than $3.50, you need to be made up. You need to be made whole. So this is what
That's right.
I want to do.
Yep.
So here's how it works. There's two pieces to it. The first piece of Slicing Pie is called the Allocation Framework, which uses this betting concept to determine how much each person gets based on their share of the bets. The second piece is the Recovery Framework, which determines how we get equity back when someone leaves the company during separation. So these two pieces provide 100% of the protection and the calculations you need to make a perfect equity split. Sometimes you'll see that this animal is called a grunt. Sometimes you'll see this referred to as a grunt fund. With Slicing Pie and a grunt fund are the same thing. So this is a universal, one-size-fits-all solution for the allocation and recovery of equity in an early-stage bootstrap company, which means that no matter where you are on the face of this earth, Slicing Pie always works. What's interesting to note is that there's only one version of fairness. If we go back to the blackjack table, it's 25-75. There's no other version that makes sense. Now, you could argue that you're a better blackjack player than me and you have some other insight to the game that I don't have, for instance, but all of that is our personal narrative. The facts on the table are that you bet 75 and I bet 25. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yes.
So if you have a version of what the split should be and I have a version of the split should be, and they're different, one of us is guaranteed to be wrong, or both of us. There's only one version of fairness. And because there's only one version of fairness, we need a model that will tell us what that version of fairness is instead of guessing. So that's what Slicing Pie does. So here's how the allocation framework works. In Slicing Pie, a poker chip is what's called a slice. A slice is a fictional unit of at-risk contribution. It marks the fact that a bet was placed. It's not worth anything in itself. You can't buy and sell slices. It only keeps track of the bets. So the way it works is you convert your contributions to slices. You take the fair market value and convert them to slices. And at any given time, or at break even, when the pie stops changing, your share equals your slices over the total slices. Just like in blackjack, it was your 3 chips divided by 4 chips, and my 1 chip divided by 4 chips. And it'll self-adjust over time to keep it fair. So there's 2 kinds of contributions someone can make to a company. The first is a non-cash. A non-cash contribution are things like time and ideas and facilities and things that don't require us to take our cash out of our pocket or our credit card out of our pocket. It doesn't consume cash. My time today, it doesn't cost me any time to be here today. Cash contributions do require cash, so most likely it's going to be unreimbursed expenses. So I might take a trip and buy a plane ticket. If the company doesn't reimburse me for that, it's a cash contribution. I actually took cash out of my pocket. Or what if I buy inventory? Like I have a company where I buy inventory. It consumes cash out of my pocket. Some things are kind of in between. So for instance, a used piece of equipment, if I've owned it for a year or two, it's a non-cash contribution because I didn't take cash in my pocket. If I bought it for the company, it's cash. So everything is either cash or non-cash. So the first step is take the fair market value. What would it be worth? So everyone knows what a printing press is worth because they can look at the price. Everyone knows what a ream of copy paper is worth. We can take the fair market value of it. We can negotiate our salary. We can take the fair market value. And you apply a normalizer. Because if I paid you $100 an hour to work for me, JP, and you work for me for 1 hour, and you want to buy something that costs $100, how many hours would you have to work?
I would have to work an hour if you're paying me an hour.
Yes, but when I paid you, I paid employment taxes, right? And
right.
when you receive the money, you pay income tax. And
That's
when you
right.
buy the stuff, you pay sales tax. So you may have to work 2 hours to earn enough money. Does that make sense?
Yeah, fair enough. Absolutely.
So we have to normalize that. So if it's a non-cash contribution, we multiply by 2. So every dollar in cash you put in, you get 2 slices. In non-cash, you get 2 slices. For cash, we double it, so you get 4 slices. For every dollar in cash you put in, you get 4 slices. For every dollar in non-cash, you get 2 slices. So $1 in non-cash is 2 slices. $1 in cash is worth 4 slices. This accommodates the fact that we're taking a high level of risk, and we'll never get paid because our contribution is such high risk. So time is a good example of a non-cash contribution. Take the fair market salary. You subtract cash compensation because if I pay you, it's not a bet. If I paid you half your hourly rate, you're only betting half your hourly rate. If I paid you all your hourly rate, then I'm taking all the risk. So you take the cash compensation, multiply it by 2, you get your grunt hourly resource rate, or GRR, which is the sound you make when you're hard at work in your company. So here's an example. $50 an hour is $100,000 a year salary at 2,000 hours in a year. Every hour, if your fair market salary is $100,000, every hour that you work is worth 100 slices per hour. You're putting 100 slices on the table every hour you work. If I paid you $10 an hour, and of that $50 an hour, then you're only betting $40 an hour, so your risk is only 80 slices per hour. So every hour that goes by, you're betting 80 slices if it became paid part in cash. And as the company gets more money through revenues or investment, I can indeed start paying your salaries instead of using cash, instead of using slices. Money is always the cash amount times 4 when the money is spent. If I buy a plane ticket, I'm not reimbursed, it's times 4. If I invest $10,000 and put it in the company account, it only turns to slices when it's consumed, not when it's sitting in the bank. So let's say I put $10,000 in the bank and you draw it out to pay rent for a car. The money consumed is times 4. So you only take into account active bets on the table. Equipment, a new piece of equipment is purchased for the company. If it's not reimbursed, it's times 4. If it's less than a year old, I use the purchase price. If it's more than a year old, I use the book value, whatever the resale value is. Those are non-cash contributions. Everything has a fair market value. Ideas and relationships. Relationships are important. If you have a big Rolodex, you're worth more than someone who does not have a big Rolodex. So the way that relationships turn into money is through sales and investment, and the commission or finance fee is logical, and that's a non-cash contribution, so it's paid out in slices times 2. Ideas are really important to people. Everyone's like, oh, how much is my idea worth? It's worth 95% of the company. Ideas are only worthwhile if they convert to cash through revenue. So the logical way to reward an idea, to buy an idea, is through a license or a royalty. So if my idea generates money, I'll get a royalty on it. If you pay me the royalty, then we're even. If you don't pay it, it's a bet. Office supplies and things like that, unreimbursed expenses, are times 4. Everything has a fair market value. It's either cash or non-cash. So here's a bunch of Canadian grunts milling around. And this guy gets an idea. So he built a team, a junior developer whose job is to build the app and the website. The founder's idea is has some equipment and has put some time in. The junior developer just puts in time, nothing else. And the rich uncle puts in cash and some important relationships. So all you do is convert to slices. There they are. You add them all up to find how many slices you have in your pie. And you divide each person's share by the total to determine your share. So the number 1 share is this. Number 2, number 3. So now the pie looks like this. So the uncle's got 60%. It makes sense because he's put up all the cash and the important sales contacts. The junior developer only has 7% because she's just putting some time. She has a low hourly rate. And the founder, who's, even though it's his idea, he's not taking most of the risk. So at this snapshot in time, if they were to break even or raise money, this would be their equity split. Let's add somebody. We're going to add a sales guy. His name is Barry. He's got a lot of contacts. He brings in some time and some relationships. Convert to slices. Add his stuff to the rest of it. And you recalculate everyone's shares. There's number 1, 2, and 3. And there's number 4 now. And now the pie looks like this. Now it's perfectly logical that the sales guy who's bringing in making rain has more than the junior developer who's not worth as much money fair market value wise. So because of slicing pie, the salesperson just slipped right in there, no problem, and was able to receive shares that were logical based on his experience. Now in Canada, what are the tax implications of getting issued shares over time?
Yeah, good question, Mike. From the model we just described, a nice thing, and to add to what you just said there, is the focus is actually on the work product being produced as opposed to legal documents that are defining all the respective interests of the participants. So in Canada, we can accrue. We have the ability to accrue for our contributions without a tax implication. So in the situation we just described, the sales guy could come in, work hard, and they could just simply, according to the model that you're the model employed through slicingpie, is just track the contributions to the point where we're actually going to issue shares in the future. So no tax implications for accruing.
When you issue shares in the future, the shares assumed to be worth 0 because the company hasn't reached break even or series. There's no underlying value. It's even at that point, so there shouldn't be any tax consequence either.
That's right, and the key is that there's no underlying value, right? Until such time as there is underlying value, at which point it needs to be recognized. But we have exemptions that make it available to us up to the point of $200,000.
What I'll tell people is it's not a wink, wink, nod, nod. You don't have value. It's a general understanding your company is not worth anything because you haven't produced anything yet, usually.
That's right. Oftentimes from the situation we're describing here is it actually may be insolvent, or it's in a situation where the rich uncle is contributing funds to the corporation, and so it's actually not worth any. There's nothing of any value until we're net of what the uncle has contributed.
Yeah, company's not worth the sum of its inputs.
That's right.
Now, what about corporate structure? In the U.S., we have LLCs and C corps. And slicingpie, of course, works with both of those, but C Corp has a little more formality to it. What's the structure in Canada?
Yeah, we don't have the same range of corporate structures available to us in Canada, which I guess simplifies the process for us here as well. For slicingpie corporations, I recommend the use of a Canadian federal corporation, which is like for American listeners a C corporation, but effectively it's a formal legal structure that allows for the issuance of shares to shareholders and a separation of liability and treatment for tax purposes. So a Canadian federal corporation is what we generally recommend.
Got it. The key is there a question coming in? The key is always the liability. The most important thing, I always say the legal stuff, you want to make sure your liability is covered, and the tax stuff is a conversation to have about what structure makes sense for you. So that's why you want to do the corporate structure. So now the next part is about getting shares back from people. That's usually where people have a lot of questions legally, what someone can do when they leave the company. And so this tends to vary quite a bit from country to country. So we got to get shares back. Now I'm going to show you how to get rid of somebody using slicingpie. There are 4 reasons why someone can leave a company. The first one is they can be fired for good reason. Fired for good reason means that the person did something that was so horrible, it was obvious they should be fired, like bringing a gun to work, or sexual harassment, or embezzlement, or stealing ideas. There are certain things that it's pretty obvious you should be fired for. The most common reason to be fired for good reason is performance reasons. And in slicingpie, you got to do warning, warning, fired. Now we have at-will employment in the United States, which means I can fire you for whatever reason I want to, but slicingpie requires 2 warnings. You have to give someone the opportunity to correct their behavior, otherwise it's not fair. So I could fire someone for no good reason. If I don't give them the warnings, then it's called no good reason. It's called at-will employment. I can just fire you for whatever reason. Is that the same in Canada? You can fire someone for no reason if you want
No,
to?
our employment law is a little more complicated here. So we don't have the concept of at-will employment in Canada. And in fact, there are much greater protections for employees we need to be sensitive to. Employees accrue rights over time, and so to end a relationship with an employee for good reason or no good reason there's likely not to be a distinguishment. So what we do in Canada to address the accruing rate for the employee is we simply give notice of the termination, a period of notice that will reflect what the requirements under the Act are. So in short, if somebody's going, you tell them they're going, and you tell them that they're going as of X and X date, which will be perhaps week or months down the road to reflect the interest that they've accrued over that course of time. So they're still going, it's just you're telling them when. The fact that they aren't being paid anything during the interim is going to ensure that there's actually no additional obligation for the corporation, and it's also then meeting its termination requirements under employment law.
So slicingpie hasn't actually granted any shares at this point.
That's right, and there's no value is the other thing that we're talking about, right? We're tracking value through the software program or future value, but we're not suggesting that there is any value attributed to the shares that need to be returned back to the corporation.
So in slicingpie, even if they did issue shares to someone because they had to, they could force a buyback, which would be $0.
That's right. Absolutely, you could do that. And of course, that's why we enter into agreements to make it clear that if they aren't around, that they're not going to be allowed to hold on to their shares either.
But if someone's fired for no good reason, and under slicingpie rules, they would be able to keep the share. They would keep their portion of the slices on the table. The bet would stay on the table, and so when the shares were issued, they would indeed be an absentee owner, because you can't hire someone and then fire them and keep the shares. That's not fair.
Yeah, so you're doing the same thing with that, Mike, though, where you're just recognizing it. You're giving them the benefit of those shares because you're saying by the slicingpie model that they're going, but they're going for either with a good reason there'll be some recognition, and with a no good reason, no recognition, so they're actually not entitled to anything.
This is one of the areas where what's legal isn't always what's fair.
That's right.
So, for instance, one of the rules of slicing, one of the logic of slicingpie is if you're fired for no good reason, you can't be expected to sign a non-compete agreement.
Right.
And some states and some countries, non-compete is easy to enforce or not easy to enforce. But you can't hire somebody, fire them, and say you can't compete with me.
Yeah, so and that's part of the point of slicingpie altogether, right? We're trying to put into place what's actually right? What makes sense, and there are moral agreements, and then there's perhaps legal agreements that may or may not be as enforceable. The same idea comes around with respect to non-competes, because as you say, if somebody's going, it's perhaps morally reprehensible for them to compete in that area, and you may have an agreement that states as much. It may be more difficult to enforce that agreement depending on the context, but in any event, you've got an agreement that states that they're not allowed to do the restricted behavior.
Right. So the third reason you can do is you can resign for good reason. Resigning for good reason implies that the company made promises that it couldn't keep. So, for instance, the company might have said, we're going to raise money in 6 months and pay you a salary. 6 months rolls around, now you have good reason to leave. Or the company might say, we're going to hire you as a salesperson, pay you commission. Our product will be ready next month. It's not ready, they can fire you. Or we're based in Ottawa, we're moving to Cincinnati, pack your bags, get your kids out of school. It's not what you signed up for. So the company has made promises that it can't keep. And startups are notorious for making promises it can't keep. We're going to raise investor money. All kinds of future thinking statements are made. If the company and the managers make promises to you as an employee that it can't keep, you have good reason to resign. And the last one is no good reason. You're resigning for no good reason. You just decide on your own that you don't want to work anymore. Maybe you don't believe in the vision anymore. Maybe you don't like the product anymore, or maybe you got a job offer somewhere else you want to work for. So leaving for your own reasons is leaving for no good reasons. So in situations A and D, getting fired for good reason or resigning for no good reason, you are essentially leaving the company in the lurch. You're making decisions about your behavior that put the company in a bad situation, which is why you would lose your slices for non-cash contributions. It just go away, and your multiplier would go away for your cash contribution, and your company gets a buyback option. That means if you put $1,000 in, I'll give you $1,000 back, and we're even. It's not fair to steal somebody's money. You can't hire someone and get them fired and steal their money. You got to pay their money back, but that person shouldn't leave with anything. Any slices. So imagine you were a solo entrepreneur. It was just you, and you quit your job. You lose everything, right? So it's the same penalty for slicing pie. Now, the flip side of the coin, if you leave for good reason or you're fired for no good reason, you get to keep your slices in the pie. The slices will remain on the table and part of the pie. And when they convert to equity with everybody else, you'll get your slices, which means my bet was reflected in my equity share. So if I came in and bet $10,000 and I was fired for no good reason, I will get $10,000 worth of shares or I'll get my proportionate amount when it's issued. So this protects the employee. So a good example is I had a woman call me not long ago. Her fair market value was $60,000. It's $5,000 a month. She worked 2 months, so she got 10,000 slices per month. That's 20,000 slices total in the pie. She got fired during a company meeting on the spot by her boss. Under slicing pie logic, she gets to keep her 20,000 slices and convert to equity later on. Now, the boss didn't want to give her that, and I don't blame him. She was not a very good employee, but he should have thought twice before he fired her on the spot and given her first warning, and then second warning, and then fire, and then he could have kept her slices. Without the warning, the employee deserves some protection. What you don't want to happen, which has happened to me in my life, is the controlling manager wants more equity for himself, and you think, I have an idea. If I fire my managers and take their equity back, I can keep more equity for myself. And indeed, that's exactly what happened. The manager fired me and all the other senior managers for the sole purpose of getting their equity back so he could resell for more later on. It was perfectly legal what he did. We signed the deal. We saw what we were going into, but it was he just took advantage of everybody. So just because it's legal, sometimes it doesn't necessarily make it fair.
That's right.
So let's show how this works in real life. So here's our team. We're going to give the junior developer a warning. Warning number one, you're not doing your job. The website doesn't work. Week goes by. She gets warning number two. She's still not showing up on time, not doing her job. Third time, she's fired. Now, she's fired for good reason, and all she had was non-cash contributions. So her slices simply come out of the pie. Just take them away. Our bet comes off the table. She's no longer part of our pie. So you recalculate everyone's share. There's 2, 3, and 4. And now our pie looks like this. Now it's logically readjusted to reflect the bets on the table. The junior developer is no longer part of the pie, so her shares just vanish, and her slices just vanish. I call them slices. Then everyone's readjusted. So the uncle has a slightly bigger share. The salesperson has a slightly bigger share, but they're not necessarily better off. Now they got to go hire somebody new. But given the circumstances under which that person left the company, now it's a perfectly fair split. So eventually you want to bake the pie. Baking the pie means you stop adding slices and actually issue equity. This is that equity issue thing we talked about. Turns it crisp golden brown. So you do this at break even or Series A. As the company generates revenue, it can use that revenue to pay its expenses, its bills, its supplies, its rent, and of course its salaries. As it pays salaries, few lower and lower bets. If you're getting reimbursed or paid, you're not making bets. So what happens is the pie naturally stops accumulating slices because the company has enough revenue. Or if it raises Series A dollars, it has enough money to pay its bills. And in my definition, a Series A investment is done by a professional investor investing in amounts of money that are adequate to fund the operational needs of the company. Anything less than that is an angel investment. You should get a convertible note, but that's for a different discussion. So Series A investment or break even is what we're looking for. So here's an example. So back to our time example. $50 an hour. If I'm not paid anything, I'm betting 100 slices per hour. Now the company gets some revenue in the door. It can use it to pay some bills. So now it can pay $10 an hour of that salary. It means the person's betting the lower amount, 80 slices per hour. As the company gets more revenue, it can pay a higher amount. There's $20 an hour, $30 an hour. I can start paying $40, and eventually the company can pay the entire salary on a go-forward basis, and there's no incremental betting. So the betting naturally stops accumulating slices. You see how that works?
Yeah, we see how it works, and a couple of other important things to point out from a Canadian perspective is shares are then also attributive valuable, so they cannot be issued for a nominal amount. So oftentimes we like to see the shares being issued at that point. And then we revert to a more traditional shareholders agreement to reflect the understanding of the shareholders on the go forward or once the pie has been baked.
Because the Series A investment sets the value, in which case you can't do an all. And also, if you're break even, that implies you have customers and revenues and other assets that can be valued by a professional evaluation person.
That's right. And it's that the company's generally at the point then where it justifies some of the expense or some of the time that we spoke about earlier. We're trying to avoid as a bootstrap startup. Yeah. So we're at the point now where there is enough of a following, and likely an investor that's putting in the type of funds that are required to do that is going to demand it as well. So it's the appropriate time, in other words.
Yeah. So to naturally stops, and now whatever rules the Series A person has, you're all subject to.
That's right.
So here we go. We're making the fight. When the companies start, when you're paying your expenses, you get profits. And one thing that's really important, people often overlook, is you have to pay salaries before you can be profitable. If you're not paying salaries, you're not profitable because you're not paying salaries. Once you're paying your salaries and your expenses, the profits that come in are now divided as dividends. You can elect to retain the dividend, the profits in the company, or distribute them as dividends. And slicingpie determines the distribution of those dividends. Or if the company sells, it determines the distribution of the proceeds of the sale. Now, if you're raising Series A, for instance, let's pretend that we're going to negotiate a $900,000 pre-money valuation and raise $1 million from a VC to fund our operations. So that's 1.9 million post-money, which means we've sold 53% of the company. And we use that money to pay our bills and buy marketing and pay for our rent. And now when the profits start coming in, we have to split them with the Series A investor. So what slicingpie gives you is a perfectly fair model that's rewarding actual contributions, providing ongoing motivation, accommodating team changes. I showed you how to add the salesperson and subtract the developer. It's flexible in the face of rapid change. We never have to draft a new agreement every time. And everyone knows they're getting treated fairly. Now, there's 3 reasons why someone would not want to use this model that you might encounter, at least in my experience. The first reason is they don't get it. You've explained it to him and she just doesn't get it, or he just doesn't get it. My life is providing slicingpie resources so I can teach you how to get the model, how it works. So I've written books about slicingpie. Handbook is the book I recommend now. The book is available in different languages all over the world. We've got Persian in the works right now, and Hebrew in the works, and Russian in the works right now. There's software online that you can that's optional that you can track your split with. And there's all kinds of, there's even a slicingpie game, a spreadsheet you can download. Anytime you encounter someone who doesn't get it, please put them in touch with me or show them the resources of slicingpie. Once you get it, it becomes obvious. Just like in blackjack, it's pretty obvious with split sheet, but sometimes people have a hard time getting their head around it because they're used to the old model so much. The second reason is they're not willing to learn it. This is even more common. You might get an advisor or a more senior person, usually old people like us, who say, I don't want to learn something new. I'm tired of learning. No, this is the way I've always done it. I want 5% or 2%. If they're not willing to learn it, just walk away from them. That's my advice. And the third one is more sinister. They do get it, but they don't want to play fair. Sometimes an investor knows they have you in a tough spot. They know that without them, you're done. So use that advantage to take advantage of you. And they do get the model, but they want to take advantage of you. In reasons 2 and 3, it's okay to say, this is not the investment for you, and not take the investment. Going out of business is not always the worst thing in the world. What's worse is working your butt off for 10 years and getting screwed 10 years later. That's worse than going out of business, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
So if you get someone who is not willing to learn it or gets it and wants to take advantage of you, just walk away. If your company is productive and going the right direction, you'll find other investors. I know it doesn't always feel that way, but it certainly is the truth in my experience. So that's how the slicingpie model works. Like I say, it works everywhere. Tell me about slicingpie in Canada. What's the ecosystem like, and what kinds of things have you had some exposure to?
Well, I find there's a real demand for it, Mike. And one of the things I'd go back to or make sure that listeners understand is that the software that you developed, and I've seen other startups try to cobble something together that's much less effective than the software you developed, that actually tracks the contributions and actually serves quite well as a cap table for traditional investors or accountants and lawyers when they come in and start talking about putting in the traditional agreements. So the model actually keeps everything really quite effectively organized for people as they are bootstrapping that corporation. So it's quite important for them to start with that mindset as they're growing their company, to think about what the future for it might hold. So it's actually almost in a way of giving some goal setting and keeping people organized for when they are getting to more traditional law. I'm seeing a real demand for that in the marketplace because, as you say, people are starting companies and they're doing it with little know-how oftentimes, and they're quite reticent to go speak to lawyers and accountants because they frankly don't have the budget to get it going in early stage. And I agree with it. They shouldn't be spending the money on legal or accounting at that stage. It's more important to get the company up and running. And so the slicing pie model is very effective for filling in during that interim. And what people don't realize is how well organized they will be when they're going to speak to their lawyer or their accountant, because they've actually followed the model in a way that keeps them organized and recognizes what they've done to get it to a certain point. Very important for them to do that in an early stage.
I call it, there's a reporting feature I call due diligence reports. You want to know why you are where you are. The notes and the direct keeping is really important. And it's also important to know that you're not tracking anything new with Slicing Pie. In a regular company, you track your expenses, you track your salary, you track those things anyway. You're just tracking them in a different system because you're not spending them. I got some questions here from the audience. One of them is relationships only get value during actual sales, right? So relationships are really important. There's two ways you would value relationships. If you are a well-connected person and you know everybody in the industry, you're going to get paid a higher base salary. Someone right out of college doesn't know anybody is going to get paid a lower base salary. So the fact you know everybody makes you a more valuable person. When you convert those relationships to sales, however, there's also a commission attached to them. So your Rolodex will only go so far. If it doesn't generate sales to you, it's not very valuable. Usually a well-connected person will get a higher base salary. And as the sales turn into money, they will get commission. And the other question here is applying the employment rules to investors. This doesn't always seem obvious, but an investor is simply an employee who's not working for your company. So if I invest $10,000 in your company, as long as I keep my money in the company, I'm an active employee. If I say I want my money back, they can say, fine, that's resignation without cause. I can't pay your money back. But when I can, I'll give you $10,000. We'll split. So you're actually, an investor who asks for their money back is actually terminating without cause. So it's kind of a strange feature, but the rules still apply. One of the questions is why fire investors can you scale back future investments? So in Slicing Pie, you want to make sure you're not raising. Slicing Pie accounts for money, doesn't account for major chunks of money. It accounts for unreimbursed expenses and petty cash. There's a feature in Slicing Pie called the well. It's generally not a good idea to put corporate expenses on someone's personal credit card. So hosting, rent, supplies, travel expenses are one thing, but if you have enough expenses that kind of are corporate, you would take a chunk of your own money and put into a corporate savings account. And anyone participating could put a chunk of money aside for corporate spending. And you transfer it out of your savings account into your checkbook to spend it. That's the point it would convert to slices. So you wouldn't run millions of dollars through there. You'd run thousands of dollars through there. If you raise money, a chunk of money from an angel investor, you usually use a convertible note, which kind of represents the state of the art. And convertible notes, are they used a lot in Canada?
Yeah, we use those as well. So it's to reflect the contribution, and it can either be recognized in the form of a loan or convert into equity. Yeah,
so if it's an arm's length investment, I always say use a convertible note if it's small. If it's part of the team, you use Slicing Pie. If it's a major investment, use a price run or Series A. It's the other questions we have here.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Got a question here of any crypto token-based companies using my model. Yeah, I know of a number of companies that there's two ways to answer this question. One, are there cryptocurrency companies who use Slicing Pie as their model? By all means, there are. Absolutely, there are. They use Slicing Pie to divide their company. The other question, the way to answer the question is, has anyone built a cryptocurrency Slicing Pie tool? And there have been some. I don't know what their status is. I get a call probably every 4 or 5 months about people saying, I want to build a cryptocurrency. If you think about a slice as a cryptocurrency, it's a very interesting tool to use. It could be done in blockchain. The reason I haven't been aggressive about building Slicing Pie in blockchain is because it does not usually need that level of security. It's people who know each other working together, doing transactions. But by all means, Slicing Pie could be a cryptocurrency. One of my favorite stories about Slicing Pie is a guy who placed an idea on Reddit, He had an idea for a business, and somebody responded to him on Reddit. And it was 6 months before they ever met anybody, but they worked at Slicing Pie, and they earned Slicing the Pie before now they have a thriving company they built and having never met each other. So that might be a situation where the cryptocurrency might come into play, but usually it's not, hasn't been a core part of Slicing Pie. What's the cryptocurrency scene like in Canada? Do you know much about it?
I know a little bit about it, and I think what you just said still applies with respect to cryptocurrency. There's a nice exemption that we use in Canada, however, that helps us avoid any discussion around securities law, which might necessarily get involved in the situation you described where the individuals don't know each other. Specifically, the exemption I'm talking about is our friends and family, up to 50 in a corporation, are entitled to deal essentially in the securities without risk of any attention from any of the securities commissions that are in Canada. So there's a nice exemption that's available to us as long as we know each other and can apply the exemption.
That would be really good, very compatible with Slicing Pie.
Yes, very much so.
The definition of security is a fairly broad one in the United States for sure, in most places. The slice is kind of a unique animal. It's not tradable. It doesn't represent actual value. It doesn't ever. You can't translate it dollar for dollar. It's obscured for the multiplier, so it's not really the same thing. It's simply a placeholder, like a poker chip. You can't spend it on things. So while I don't think about it as a security, it's clear that it could be classified as a security. And someone who doesn't want to hang out with me for an afternoon might classify as a security and go with it. So that's where you'd be careful. That's why it's good to use with tight-knit groups. If you're raising a lot of money, you don't necessarily need Slicing Pie, so that's a non-issue. One of the comments online here was that Ethereum was invented in Canada. Is that true? You know much about Ethereum?
Ethereum, that's right. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, it's developed in Canada, and apparently it's a bit more sophisticated than Bitcoin. So certainly yes.
Yeah, I'd love to see. Slicing the slice, an e-slice or a crypto slice be invented, because it would allow you to expand your startup team. And I when I start companies, I do all the work myself. I'm kind of a one-man wolf pack, and I like it that way just because of how it developed. But I'd like to be able to expand my network, people that I don't know and that I may not want to know. I just want their talents, So I want someone to do marketing for me, to do supplies and that kind of stuff. So crypto and e-slice would be an interesting thing to have. So, well, it looks like we've answered most of the questions that are up here. Any closing comments for Canadian grunts?
For Canadian grunts, I'd encourage you to explore the model. As I say, I've helped literally hundreds of people start their corporations, and I've seen them spend a lot of money trying to structure and worry about the structure too early in the stages for the corporation. The nice thing about the Slicing Pie model is it takes that worry out of the hands of the founders of the corporation. They can decide how it's going to actually evolve before they start worrying about crystallizing shares and convertible agreements and all these types of things that lawyers and accountants want to charge for. Get the work underway, make sure the corporation is viable, and then we can worry about those things later down the road. Just make sure you track your inputs all the way through in the way you described, so that we can make sure it's reflected at the appropriate time.
And what kind of law do you do? What's your main practice besides setting?
I'm a corporate commercial lawyer. Yeah, thanks, Mike. I'm a corporate commercial lawyer, and my focus is on the owner-managed business, right? So helping a business grow from seed to grow to eventual exit. And the things I say I like, and the range of options I'm able to present to business owners is the Slicing Pie model. It's oftentimes very appropriate when there's a number of people bootstrapping the corporation, and I send them off on their way with a copy of your book. And actually, as you can hear me saying, I'm instructing them to use the software as well, to track what they're doing, build it to the point where it justifies some further involvement from an accountant or a lawyer that's going to charge them for their time. So certainly send them on their way, make sure they get to the spot where they've created the value that then justifies the fees that professionals are going to charge as they get more involved.
Right. How do they find you?
They find me through you for the most part. So to the extent, and thank you, I mean, as people are looking for new ways of doing things, they're finding you and the models that you've built to help them grow these companies. Otherwise, there's a lot of word of mouth. For others that have started companies, they know that I'm the type of lawyer that will help them build the company along to the point that there is some value created, and that becomes the win-win for all involved, even the professionals involved. If you're helping a company grow and build up, when it becomes has the type of following where there is an exit or a Series A, as we're describing here, or a possible sale, that's where there's further participation by a professional involved. Until that time, you want to work with good professionals that can help you get there. So I always talk about being a win-win, right? Creating a win-win. And the Slicing Pie model is a great tool for a lot of these startups to make sure they get it to the point where they're then talking about real serious money.
Good. Well, thanks a lot for being here today. I appreciate it. I love that Canadians are using Slicing Pie, and you're one of my most popular Canadian lawyers. I appreciate that. It's a pleasure spending time with you today.
That's great. Thanks, Mike. Thanks so much for having me on, and feel free to reach out if anyone's listening and wants to talk more about the model.
All right, signing off. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, Mike. Bye now.